Thank you very much. And I'd like to take off from where Caroline Lucas ended, which is her call for a redefinition of the very concept of GDP, which is really a binding constraint in any move forward on sensible environmental policies. As long as we measure and monitor economic growth through the narrow lens of what we define as gross domestic product GDP, we are going to be hamstrung in the years to come. And therefore, I entirely wholeheartedly agree with her that it's time to make the transition from a GDP defined as the gross domestic product to a GDP standing for a green domestic product, where we take into account in the measurement of economic growth, we take into account the costs, the ecological costs of economic growth, and also the ecological benefits that governments confer on societies through their actions. Now, I'd like to make four very brief and pointed interventions this afternoon. First, I do hope that at the end of Glasgow, the end of the 12 days in Glasgow, we've had the headlines, we've had the commitments for 2050, 2060, 2070, when most of us will not be around to hold ourselves accountable, and therefore it's easy to make these commitments. I do feel that the one irreducible minimum that we should expect from Glasgow is a finalization of the Paris Rulebook. Because as you know, the entire Paris architecture is based on a bottom-up commitment architecture and a top-down monitoring, reporting, and verification architecture. And 6 years after Paris, we still do not have complete clarity on how countries are going to hold themselves internationally accountable for the pledges they make. Holding yourselves domestically accountable is one thing, but holding yourself internationally accountable is the essence of a global agreement. And therefore, I think it's absolutely essential that we don't get carried away by the headlines that have been generated by the heads of state and heads of government, and hope that at the end of excruciating negotiations, undoubtedly having gone through Copenhagen and Cancun myself, I can testify how excruciating these negotiations can be. But at the end of it, I think we should certainly hope for clarity and finality, not just clarity, finality on how the system to hold countries accountable for the pledges that they take voluntarily will look like, what is the design, and how it's going to be instituted, what are the institutions that are going to be involved in its enforcement and in its implementation. Secondly, I think a lot of talk has gone on in the last couple of days on the commitments of net zero. I myself have been quite a skeptic on this whole net zero approach, because I think the net zero is really a cop-out approach, because what is more important is to ask ourselves, what are the milestones in the 2020s? What are the milestones that we're going to hold ourselves accountable for in the 2030s? Of course, it's important to have an aspirational goal, and to that extent, the 2050 or 2060 or 2070 commitment has some meaning. But to me, the real meaning is, what are we going to do in the next 5 years, the 10-year, 15-year, 20-year horizon? And there, I think we need far greater homework. We need to work backwards from the pledges that the heads of state and the heads of government have made, and really get down to looking at what the milestones look like in the 2 decades to come. So I think it's important to get a stronger fix, a greater fix on the 2020s and the 2030s at the economy level, and certainly at the sectoral level, in agriculture, in industry, in transport, and in other sectors of the economy. The third issue that I would like to say is that, having been associated with this, with the COP in various capacities, as a Minister of Environment, as I said, at Copenhagen and Cancun, and subsequently as a Member of Parliament and Chairman of the Indian Parliament's Committee on Science and Technology, Environment and Climate Change, I think it's important to give greater support, greater institutional support to the COP architecture that we have, which is basically a 10-day affair in a 365-day year, and countries tend to slacken off. And a few weeks before a COP is about to be held, they scrounge around for announcements to be made, and the work begins to make that particular COP meaningful. What you need is a 24/7 by 365 institutional architecture. Not just multilateral. The UNFCCC is a multilateral agreement, but we need plurilateral windows. I mean, for example, we have the methane window now, which is a plurilateral window. So we need a multiplicity of these windows, and throughout the year, we are working, refining, and looking at the enforcement. In parallel, of course, to increasing the level of ambition, because very clearly we are nowhere close to having a level of ambition that would deliver on the 1.5-degree temperature rise limit that we as a global community have set for ourselves. And the fourth and final point I wish to make is that, climate change is only one of the 9 planetary boundaries that was set out in 2009 by the Stockholm Resilience Center. Of course, climate change, global warming dominates the headline. But there are other pressing environmental issues. There are issues relating to the loss of biodiversity. There are issues relating to the deforestation and land use changes, ocean acidification, ozone depletion, particulate matter, aerosol pollution, which has tremendous morbidity and mortality impacts, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, hydrological cycle. Now, some of these aren't being addressed. For example, through the Montreal Protocol, we now have the Kigali amendments, which look at both phase out and phase down of the HFCs. But it's important, I should point out, that once upon a time, the HFCs, the hydrofluorocarbons, were seen to be a solution to the problem of ozone depletion. And they were substituting for the hydrochlorofluorocarbons. But now we know that the HFC, which was a solution at one point of time, is actually a problem from a global warming point of view. And hence we are now looking at a phase down or a phase out of the HFCs. So what is a solution at one point of time may end up becoming a problem looked at from a different perspective. But I do wish to underscore, and this is something that I've been saying for a long time, that we face a multiplicity, a myriad environmental problems. The most immediate problem, of course, we face the problem of pollution and the impact it has on public health. We face the problem of loss of biodiversity and the way we manage our biodiversity. And in many ways, the COVID-19 pandemic is a reflection of imbalances in the way we have managed biodiversity. So while we focus on climate change, while we focus on the issue of global warming, it should not be at the cost or detriment of the other environmental issues, of the other planetary boundaries that humanity has either crossed already or is in danger of overstepping. So I think we should look at this in a comprehensive and holistic manner. Of course, let me end by saying that ultimately, international agreements, international commitments, international pledges are one thing, but there should be no dissonance between what a country pledges internationally and what it does domestically. Ultimately, it's the environmental policy of a country. It has to be embedded in the domestic political context, in the domestic economic context. You can't have, one set of goals internationally, and while domestically you're going in a different direction. So you have to bring about this convergence between sustainability pledges that a country makes internationally and sustainability actions that a country takes domestically. So once again, let me thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be with you, although virtually. I wish I had been with you physically face to face, but I suppose this is the best we could do, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you.